Welcome back to Earthly Delights, where we explore the living secrets beneath our feet and learn how to help a garden grow stronger from the ground up. Today, I want to talk about something every gardener has struggled with at some point: the long waiting game of composting. You save your kitchen scraps, pile up your grass clippings, turn everything over, add water, and then you wait. But months later, that pile may still look only halfway finished. Or maybe you spread a thick, beautiful layer of dark compost over your beds in spring, only to see it almost disappear by the end of summer. It can feel like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. But what if the older generations knew something many modern gardeners have forgotten? What if there was a simple method for building rich, resilient soil that keeps feeding your plants for years, not just for one short season? And what if the material we have been told to avoid, the one so many gardeners sweep up and throw away, could actually help create a more self-sustaining garden? Today we are bringing back a technique supported more than a century ago by the legendary agricultural scientist, Dr. George Washington Carver. We are talking about sawdust. Yes, that fine pale wood powder often left behind at sawmills, workshops, and lumberyards. So get ready, because this may challenge the way you think about soil health. By the end, you may never look at sawdust as waste again. Part 1. The fast carbon versus slow carbon dilemma. To understand why sawdust can be such a valuable resource, we first need to understand why regular compost sometimes leaves our soil needing more. Compost is excellent, and I would never tell a gardener to ignore it. But in the soil, compost often behaves like fast carbon. When you add compost to a garden bed, the bacteria and fungi in the soil consume it quickly. They break it down, release a burst of nutrients, and give plants an immediate lift. It is an easy meal for the soil life. But much like a sugar rush, that benefit can fade faster than we expect. The organic matter continues breaking down until much of it is gone, leaving the soil exposed again and pushing gardeners into that repeated cycle of adding more season after season. This is where sawdust becomes so interesting. Sawdust is slow carbon. It is made mostly of cellulose and lignin, with small amounts of natural waxes and resins. The cellulose gives microbes a steady source of energy, while the lignin is much tougher and far more resistant to quick decay. So instead of vanishing in one growing season, sawdust works quietly over time. Compost is like a match that burns bright and fast. Sawdust is more like a slow-burning log. But that raises an important question. If sawdust has this much value, why have so many gardening books warned us not to use it? Part 2. Busting the great nitrogen myth. Now let's deal with the biggest fear gardeners have about sawdust. For decades, the common advice has been very clear. Never use sawdust, because it will steal nitrogen from the soil and leave your plants hungry. And there is some truth behind that warning. The problem is that the warning has often been explained in the wrong way. Healthy soil usually works best around a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of about 30:1. Fresh sawdust is completely different. Its ratio can range from about 400:1 all the way up to 750:1. That is a huge amount of carbon. And in the soil, microorganisms always get the first meal. To break down that much carbon, bacteria and fungi need nitrogen so they can build proteins, enzymes, and living tissue. So if you mix fresh sawdust directly into the soil, especially around the root zone, those microbes will pull available nitrogen from the surrounding soil. That can leave your plants yellow, weak, and slow growing. This process is called nitrogen immobilization. But here is the key point most people miss. This nitrogen problem mainly happens when fresh sawdust is mixed into the soil. When sawdust is used only as a surface mulch, the nitrogen drawdown stays in a very thin layer right at the top, just a few millimeters deep, far above most active plant roots. Used correctly as a protective blanket over the soil, sawdust does not rob your plants. It shields the soil, holds moisture, and protects the nutrients already there. The real issue was never sawdust itself, it was how and where people were using it. Part 3. Architect of the Earth. Building soil structure. Once we stop being afraid of sawdust, we can start using one of its greatest strengths: the way it changes soil structure. Sawdust does not just feed the soil slowly. Over time, it can help rebuild the physical foundation of a garden. If you've ever tried to grow vegetables in heavy clay that feels almost like concrete, you know how hard roots have to work. And if you've gardened in sandy soil, you know how quickly water can disappear before plants have a chance to use it. This is where well-decomposed sawdust becomes valuable. It is one of those old, overlooked materials that can improve soil tilth in a very practical way. The lignin fibers in sawdust act almost like a tiny sponge throughout the soil. In clay, they help create more airspace and better movement. In sand, they help hold moisture longer, giving roots a steadier environment. As a surface mulch, sawdust also works like a natural climate control layer. Plant roots struggle to keep developing when soil temperatures climb above 85 degrees Fahrenheit. A 2 to 3 inch layer of sawdust helps insulate the root zone, keeping it cooler during intense summer heat and offering protection during winter cold. In an important study from Aswan, Egypt, researchers compared woody trees grown in pure sand with trees grown in sand mixed with composted sawdust. The results were impressive. The growing medium containing 60% composted sawdust produced better shoot length, stronger root mass, and higher leaf nutrient content. Once that carbon becomes stable, it can perform better than many traditional soil mixes. Part 4. The Fungal Network Awakening. Now let's go deeper, because some of the most important changes happen where we cannot easily see them. When sawdust enters the garden, it begins to support a different kind of soil life. Most ordinary compost tends to feed soil bacteria very quickly. But forests, which are among the richest and most self-sustaining growing systems on Earth, depend heavily on fungi. When you add sawdust, you are feeding wood decay fungi and encouraging mycorrhizal networks. These are the organisms built to handle tough woody material. They have the enzymes needed to break down lignin, the durable compound that makes wood so slow to decay. As these fine, thread-like fungal strands move through the sawdust, they begin tying soil particles together into stable crumbs. That is one of the reasons healthy soil develops that dark, soft, chocolate cake texture gardeners love. It holds nutrients better, absorbs water more evenly, and resists being washed apart by heavy rain. Research has also shown that sawdust in a potting mix can help control damping off, a serious disease that destroys young seedlings, by encouraging beneficial fungi that compete against harmful organisms. So when you use sawdust correctly, you are not only feeding plants, you are helping rebuild the living structure of the soil itself. Part 5. 2 master techniques. The drench and the trench. So how do we use sawdust in the garden without creating problems for our plants? There are 2 simple techniques I have found especially useful when you want the benefits of sawdust without risking nitrogen stress. Technique number 1 is the nitrogen drench. If you are using fresh sawdust as a mulch, spread it about 2 to 3 inches deep over the soil surface, but keep it a few inches away from plant stems so moisture does not collect there and cause rot. Right after spreading it, give that mulch a light nitrogen boost to help the microbes begin working without competing with your plants. You can use a diluted urea solution, about 30 grams dissolved in 10 liters of water for each square meter. Or you can choose a diluted organic liquid, such as poultry manure tea or comfrey tea. This is not something you need to keep repeating. You do it once to pre-charge the sawdust, and then the soil life can take over. Technique number 2 is the forgotten backyard method, often called trench layering. Instead of building your compost only in a pile above ground, dig a shallow trench in your garden bed about 1 foot deep. Add your kitchen scraps, layer in handfuls of sawdust, and then cover everything with the soil you removed. This works so well because above-ground compost piles can dry out and lose nitrogen into the air as ammonia. Underground, the soil helps hold both moisture and nitrogen in place. Earthworms, which often avoid hot, exposed compost piles, usually move into these trenches very quickly. Within 6 to 8 weeks, that buried trench can settle into a rich strip of dark humus, ready to support planting. You are feeding the soil directly from the inside out. Part 6. The do's and don'ts of sourcing sawdust. Before you go out and collect the nearest pile of wood dust, we need to be very clear about safety. Sawdust can be a wonderful soil building material, but not all sawdust belongs in the garden. The wrong source can bring unwanted chemicals into the soil you are trying so carefully to improve. Do not use sawdust from engineered wood products, such as MDF, particle board, or interior plywood. These materials often contain urea formaldehyde and phenol formaldehyde glues. As they break down, they can release formaldehyde into the environment, harming soil microbes and creating real health concerns. You should also strictly avoid sawdust from CCA-treated lumber, the greenish outdoor wood often used in older construction. It can contain arsenic, chromium, and copper, which may leach into the soil and contaminate the food chain. Also, stay away from wood that has been painted, stained, sealed, or glued with epoxies that may contain BPA. And be mindful of certain tree species. Black walnut sawdust contains juglone, a natural allelopathic chemical that can stunt or even kill sensitive crops such as tomatoes. What you want is clean, raw, untreated sawdust from a sawmill, a local arborist, or your own woodworking projects. Hardwoods like oak and beech are excellent, while softwoods like pine can also work very well, and usually break down a little faster. Pure, natural wood is the slow gold your garden has been waiting for. Part 7. A Legacy of Fertility. In a world that constantly pushes for instant results and fast-acting fertilizers, the garden reminds us of something deeper. Patience is part of true abundance. The sawdust method is not a quick weekend trick. It is a return to the slow, steady rhythm that nature has always used to build fertile ground. More than a century ago, when Dr. George Washington Carver taught struggling farmers how to restore worn-out soils, he encouraged the use of forest leaves and wood residues. He understood that real wealth in farming was not something bought in a bag. It was built slowly, carefully, and patiently in the soil itself. When we spread sawdust, we are copying the forest floor. Over time, that pale wood dust blends into the earth and becomes deep, dark humus filled with life. Weeds are held back, moisture is preserved, and the garden begins to grow into a stronger, more self-sustaining ecosystem that asks less from you with each passing season. At that point, you are no longer growing plants for just one harvest. You are building a lasting legacy of fertility. Conclusion. So let me ask you this. Are you ready to stop fighting your soil and begin feeding it the way nature has always intended? Are you ready to take a forgotten waste material and turn it into the foundation of a stronger, healthier garden? Start simply. This season, try layering clean, untreated sawdust in just one perennial bed or along one garden path. Give it a gentle nitrogen drench, then pay attention to what happens. Look for the fungal threads. Notice the earthworms. Watch how your plants respond when the soil beneath them begins to function like a living, breathing ecosystem. Sometimes the slowest methods give us the deepest and most lasting rewards. If this look at regenerative soil building gave you a new way to think about your garden, subscribe and join our community here at Earthly Delights. Share this with another gardener who is tired of waiting on compost, and leave a comment below. What is the most surprising material you have ever used to build your soil? Until next time, keep digging, keep learning, and keep finding the earthly delights in your own backyard.